the next smart option, if you cannot fight it as a government, is to adopt it. And we're really in a race. We're in a race about which country makes the first move. It's one of the most important geopolitical questions of the decade. Najib Bukele has really been stacking hard for his country, and I think he will make El Salvador a first world country within 5 to 10 years. What Bitcoin achieved is to remove the sinful nature of mankind from the financial system, because it's based on rules and not rulers. Having a sound monetary base that is not robbing people of their savings, it's just something beautiful.
I researched and I got to know that politicians are the sixth most hated job on earth. And not only are you a politician, you are also in Bitcoin, which is an interesting thought experiment, because politicians, as we all know, are maybe misunderstood. It's the most one of the most hated jobs on earth, and Bitcoin is also widely misunderstood. And Bitcoiners, especially those who make early money, who are long in there, maybe people are also like, you have to explain it to people well, and you have to explain it good to people to really understand what Bitcoin is. And if you're a Bitcoiner, you sometimes have this experience in the normal society that you have all this FUD going on with people coming to like, first of all, what drives you to be in both, and where do you see the connection also, and what is your experience being in both areas?
So I got interested in politics when I was 14 years old. I grew up in Mongolia. I lived there 12 years. And even during that time, during my teenage years, I became interested in politics. And then when I was 16 years old and my family moved back to Switzerland, I almost immediately started to become politically active, and I always had it on my heart to fight for justice. And so one of my main political issues I've been fighting for is combating human trafficking, because almost no one else takes it on, and it's just such a great injustice that is mostly tolerated, or people think, well, it's just there and we can do nothing about it, but I don't believe that's true. So, I went into politics because I want to have a positive impact on society. In Switzerland, many people go into politics because of their view of the world, because they want to have a positive impact on society, while actually in most other places on the planet, mostly people go into politics because of money. So, you discussed these studies that say politicians are quite hated, and it is understandable. So on the one hand, depending on which country you are in, politicians really only look after themselves and try to get as rich as possible in as quick, in as little time as possible. But then on the other hand, politicians who just also stand for certain values, stand for certain things. And I'm in a smaller party in Switzerland, so we're not exactly mainstream. So we stand for things that maybe that are not really accepted in the large part of society. So also in this regard, you get a lot of confrontation and people maybe not liking you, because not maybe because you're greedy or corrupt, but simply because of the political issues you stand for. So that's maybe on the politics side. And regarding Bitcoin, I started to dive into the how the financial system works in 2015, and I quickly realized it's really corrupt, and that the fiat system is deeply, deeply problematic. And so at first I thought that the solution would be gold and silver. So I really quickly became a gold and silver bug, and also started to advise people how they can take their savings out of the banking system, put it into gold and silver, and I knew in 2015 that there was something like Bitcoin, but I never really researched it deeply. So it was only a very, very slow journey of just looking from time to time again, looking at Bitcoin, trying to understand it, giving up on trying to understand it, but then trying again some time later. And then in 2020, I read the Bitcoin Standard by Seyr, and that was my first gradually, then suddenly moment. Actually, the book, but also an interview by Mark Friedrich with Michael Seyr. I think those two things were really the push into the Bitcoin rabbit hole for me. And since then, I've also really advocated for Bitcoin publicly as a politician. And actually, just 2 days ago, I filed for political initiatives in the Parliament of Canton Bern, Swiss Canton Bern, to have a cantonal Bitcoin strategy. So I'm a member of Parliament in the Canton of Bern in Switzerland.
It's amazing. And I think also, when we talk about the studies, how politicians are, not looked at well, I think Swiss is actually different. I don't know if it's actually like that, but I think in Swiss the politician system is way more directly, and there's way more exchange going on and communication going on between the citizens and the politicians, as I understand it from the outside. I'm not located in the Swiss, so maybe it's different in Swiss than most of my listeners are actually from America, from the UK, from Canada. Maybe for those who don't know the Swiss political system, how would you say is it different on a big scale than, let's say, the American system, or what's most European countries, the system, UK. Obviously, Swiss decided from the beginning to not be in the European Union, which is also a differentiator between almost all the other countries.
Yes, so actually I also wrote an article on this issue, on the political system of Switzerland, also for my international audience, so I can quickly summarize what 3 aspects make the political system of Switzerland quite unique. And as you mentioned, we're not part of the European Union. I think one of the main reasons is that Swiss citizens are allowed to decide this matter. So we have direct democracy. We're not the only country in the world that has direct democracy. Many American states have direct democracy on the state level, but not on, of course, not on the US national level. But in Switzerland, direct democratic rights are very strong. So we vote on 4 times a year. We vote on different policy issues, amendments to the Constitution of Switzerland, but also referendums on laws. So if politicians want to join the European Union in Switzerland, they have to sell it to the voters first. And Swiss voters are overwhelmingly against joining the European Union by like 80 to 90%. So it's impossible under these conditions for politicians just to say we want to go into the European Union. So I think that's one of the big strengths of our political system, that there's this feedback loop between citizens and politicians. So politicians, once they're elected, they're still being controlled by the citizens in the most important policy questions. It's not the politicians who make the final decision, but actually the citizens. So I think that's great. And in this regard, Switzerland has the strongest direct democratic rights in all of the world. So our citizens voted on more policy questions than almost all of the world combined in the past 150 years. So that's aspect number 1, direct democracy. Aspect number 2 is not totally unique. It's federalism. Federalism, we know it's there in Germany, in Austria, in the United States, in Canada. But in Switzerland, it's you can measure it actually by how much taxpayer money is spent on the cantonal level, on the provincial level. And that's the second highest in the world. Only Canada, the Canadian provinces, they spend more taxpayer money on the provincial level. In Switzerland, it's about 45% of all taxpayer money that is spent on the provincial level, and only 1/3 on the national level. So having a high degree of federalism is not totally unique in the world, but it is one of the aspects that make the Swiss political system as it is. And then there's one aspect, the third aspect, which makes the political system of Switzerland totally unique. You have it nowhere else in the world, which is team government. So Switzerland is not governed by one strong prime minister or president, but there is a team of 7, a college of 7 ministers that share power equally. And they take turns in being president of Switzerland annually. So every year we have a peaceful transition. I mean, the president is then not more powerful than the other 6 in the government, but he'll have more representative functions. So having a team government, I believe, has helped us to have extraordinary political stability. So we didn't have any armed conflict in Switzerland since 1847. And so I believe we had a lot of economic prosperity because of that, also partly due to this political stability. And it also, I believe it's also one of the reasons why people in Switzerland are most satisfied with democracy in the world. There have been studies done, and satisfaction with democracy has fallen below 50%, for example, in the United States or the United Kingdom, while in Switzerland it's been increasing even so that Swiss citizens are most satisfied with democracy in the world. So these are the 3 big aspects, and then there's maybe a smaller aspect, which is that politicians are not really paid too well in Switzerland, so which I think is also good. So there are fewer incentives to go into politics because of money.
Yeah, I think Austria actually has one of the highest salaries in the world for politicians. I don't know the exact statistics, but I think in the last election it came up that Austrian politicians are really well paid compared even to other politicians. I think the Austrian, like the official salary, of course, politicians make also other ways money, but in the direct way. It's really unique for me, Swiss, and I think there's also the connection to Bitcoin there, because there's no 100% leader. Of course, in Bitcoin, it's like way more decentralized. There's not a team of 7 people that has control over the Bitcoin network, but this is like unique to it. And the direct democracy, it's like in Bitcoin, like if everybody decides to do something with Bitcoin, then it will be done. And this is something also like the comparison to Swiss. And for me, interesting is that usually the adoption is the highest in the country that needs the most. I think Nigeria is still the country with the highest Bitcoin adoption. Why? Because they need it. It's simple like that. But Swiss is unique because it has a really strong currency with the Swiss franc. It's probably one of the highest, one of the strongest currencies in the world.
It's the best shitcoin. It's the best fiat shitcoin there is in the world.
Exactly. And so Swiss people would not need, like all the other countries need Bitcoin more than the Swiss people, but it seemingly is the adoption quite good. I heard about Beach Bitcoin, that they don't have a Swiss bank account. They only live on a Bitcoin standard. I'm still curious how she is doing that. There you can pay taxes in some districts with Bitcoin. You have Lugano, where you can pay almost everything in Bitcoin. Canton Zug, I heard, is really friendly to Bitcoin and crypto in general. So why is it in Swiss that politicians and regulation and even also the people, the Swiss people that I speak, it's like they are more open to the idea of sound money, the idea of gold, and then obviously Bitcoin is just a digital version and the next evolution of that. Then they're also more open to that. Like, is this from historical coming? Is this from the direct democracy? What is the reason why Swiss people are so keen on Bitcoin?
So I think economic pain is one factor. It's an important factor. But if economic pain was the only factor, then I believe a Bitcoin adoption would be highest in Zimbabwe or Lebanon, which, I mean, there's some Bitcoin adoption, of course, but it's not the highest. So it's a combination of different factors. I think in Nigeria, it's also a young population. So having young minds is also very important. It's quite a tech-savvy population, at least maybe in the centers, in the big cities. And why? I mean, in Switzerland, it's also quite high Bitcoin adoption compared to other countries, and I think there are several reasons. So I think what you mentioned is with sound money, the Swiss franc was backed by gold, at least partially up until the 1990s. And so we still have a quite strong understanding of the importance of gold and silver, of cash. Like people still pay a lot in cash, not like in the Nordic countries like Sweden. And we are sort of aware that we have a stable, quite stable currency. The Swiss franc had the slowest money expansion in worldwide in the past 40 or 60 years. It's still very bad, of course, because of fiat and the whole system, and saving in Swiss francs doesn't make sense, but it's still better than with any other fiat currency in the world. So I think there's there's a good environment to understand the importance of Bitcoin, also because we appreciate decentralized political structures. So the decentral aspect of Bitcoin is very interesting for us. And because Swiss citizens vote on policy issues, they're being trained every year to think critically, to also make up their own mind, not just blindly trust the government on any issue, but also to think for themselves, to decide for themselves whether they think a certain policy direction is a good idea. And you can also see this, for example, with the COVID vaccination. So 30% of the Swiss population remained unvaxxed, which is a much higher number than in most other Western countries. Although there has also been a high pressure here, but people are more skeptical, more thinking for themselves. For example, I myself, I said, I looked at Pfizer. I looked at them paying fines, billions of fines, for malpractice, for being responsible for killing hundreds of thousands of people in the past decades. And then I did my own research, as is common in the Bitcoin community. Then I decided I'm not getting vaxxed. I don't trust them. I know there's very safe alternatives to protect myself from a severe COVID infection. So this is maybe a bit more the mindset that is, I mean, more prevalent in Switzerland also, and which then aligns also more to the Bitcoiners' mindset.
Do you think the Swiss will be one of the fastest countries to actually adopt kind of a Bitcoin standard? Do you think the Swiss franc will always be there in the Swiss political system? Do you see maybe coming back like 1990, like the coming off the gold standard? Maybe at some point they will come on a Bitcoin standard where they're like central bank of Swiss is like, we are backing our currency with Bitcoin. Do you see something happening in like the next 10, 20, 30 years in the Swiss?
Well, not only in Switzerland, but almost in every country. So I would be surprised if in the next 10 years, if most governments or central banks don't have a small Bitcoin allocation. I would be surprised. And of course, I hope that Switzerland would be one of the first countries. I think El Salvador is doing a tremendous job. We just learned recently that they hold more than about twice as much as Bitcoin as people thought they were holding. So President Najib Bukele has really been stacking hard for his country. And I think he will make El Salvador a first world country within 5 to 10 years because of that strategy. And then I think it's one of the most important geopolitical questions of the decade. Which countries are the first movers with Bitcoin adoption? Because I don't want it to be China, I don't want it to be Putin, and I don't want it to be the Arab oil sheikhs. I want it to be freedom-loving countries, stable democracies, and of course also third world countries that want to get ahead, that make the first move, because whoever like is the first adopter, these countries will have a tremendous advantage. So right now I'm actually quite happy. El Salvador is a wonderful example. I'm very, very happy for El Salvador that they are the first. I'm also happy for Bhutan, that another small country that just sees the potential of Bitcoin mining. Oman is also okay, but maybe if Saudi Arabia was next, then that's maybe not so good because just of the human rights record. So that's what I try to communicate in politics, also with the Bitcoin strategy I'm proposing for Canton Bern. I try to tell people, look, Bitcoin is such a great technology. You cannot stop it anymore. It's just, you cannot fight it. You cannot even fight it. Not even the Communist Party of China can really fight it. So the next option, the next smart option, if you cannot fight it as a government, is to adopt it. So and then we're really in a race. We're in a race about which country makes the first move. And the president of the Swiss Central Bank, Thomas Jordan, he said, well, if we decided we need Bitcoin on the balance sheet, we have like, things are in place, we could move quickly. He already said like 1.5 years ago or so. So I do hope that the Swiss National Bank, they study Bitcoin. I hope they do. And I hope they will be, I cannot expect them to be like El Salvador and to belong to the first 5%, but I hope that once it catches on, that they will be nevertheless not lagging behind too much.
And you talked about a proposal. Is there something, maybe like another angle, if you assume total control of the world and you would be like, what things should politicians do for Bitcoin? What should we implement as Swiss, as Europe, as the world to drive the Bitcoin adoption forward? What would you do as a state? What would you do as like a political force for Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin doesn't need politics. People will, out of their own free will, more people will opt out of the fiat system and go into the Bitcoin standard. Some will live on the Bitcoin standard like I do. I hold almost zero fiat. I even use a Bitcoin debit card to like do most of my everyday purchases in order for me to be able to almost not touch fiat anymore, just a little. This just became my lifestyle. Once I realized how problematic the fiat system is, I said I want as a lifestyle to have as little to do with fiat as possible. And now so I said, but Bitcoin doesn't need politics. That's, I think, important to realize. But it is politicians, it's nation states, it's provinces, it's municipalities that need Bitcoin to get ahead. So every nation state, every government that lags behind, it will be more difficult for them fiscally. But of course, there's also the debate within the Bitcoin community that says, well, Bitcoin should be purely bottom up, and governments should just stay away, which I can understand. But just because of game theory, we know that they won't stay away. So I want the best countries, the countries with the best governments, with those that are most freedom promoting, that have the best democracy. I want these governments to be first, and not the dictators of the world and those that abuse human rights and do all kinds of evil stuff. So I think that's important to realize, even for Bitcoiners who are maybe anarcho-capitalists or very libertarian, to realize, well, do you want China to be the first or one of the first and then to control the world? Like, you don't want that. So it's better to help where you live, if it's a decent government, more or less a decent government, help them to understand Bitcoin and to belong to the first movers.
21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. Yeah, and this is extremely beautiful because Bitcoiners are... I never met a Bitcoiner that this description does not fit him. Bitcoiners are really freedom loving.
Yes.
And for the game theory, for countries, how can they benefit from it? They can benefit from two ways from it. The first is like drive Bitcoin to their balance sheets, like just adopt Bitcoin, do Bitcoin things in their country. But the second thing is drive Bitcoiners to their country, like attract Bitcoiners
Yes.
from all over the world to live in their countries. And this is where game theory is coming in. To attract freedom-loving people, you have to have a freedom-loving country. And I hope in that regards and that change over the next decades coming, I hope that the whole world gets a little bit more freedom-loving, a little bit more than direct democracy, a little bit more in that direction that I think Swiss actually is. And Swiss is actually one of the role models in the world when we look at how we can structure politics. And I hope we can just move there a little bit more. So my question to you would be now, how can countries like Swiss try to attract more Bitcoiners? How can they gain the trust of Bitcoiners and get people to like move there?
I mean, we can look at what El Salvador is doing because they are attracting Bitcoiners. They're attracting very intelligent entrepreneurial minds with lots of capital that will be even worth much more in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's really an unbelievable job that El Salvador is really doing. I mean, the country is... I really want to visit soon. I haven't been there. Just from what I'm hearing, it's transforming and at a very rapid pace in a very good direction, which is very seldom. So I guess we basically need to be doing what they're doing. I mean, Switzerland's already very peaceful, so I think that's an important thing, that people can feel safe. That also because of our political stability, we also have a very, very high degree of protection of property rights and of individual freedoms, just excluding the COVID time, but in general, I would say. Yeah, so I think those are really important factors. And then, of course, you can do things like in Lugano that you can pay taxes with Bitcoin or fees at the municipal level, or in Canton Zug, you can also pay taxes with Bitcoin. That's actually one of my proposals. Or what I also propose is that state employees can receive their salaries in Bitcoin, which just will help to foster a Bitcoin circular economy. The third proposal I made is I asked the government for a report on the potential of Bitcoin mining to stabilize our energy grids and also to use wasted energy. And the fourth proposal I made is for the canton and its pension fund to DCA into Bitcoin. So those are the 4 ideas that I just submitted 2 days ago, which I hope would help to, like, if we bring it through in Parliament, if we find a majority, I hope that this will attract Bitcoiners to Canton Bern and to Switzerland. And I mean, we see Bitcoiners are very rewarding. If they see a country is really having a solid Bitcoin strategy, they really appreciate that, because they know this is also important for... I mean, Bitcoin adoption will happen anyway, but I believe it's also good to help to accelerate it, because we want to get rid of the fiat system, right? And also to just foster a good education, and that people are not being scammed by shitcoins or just by not serious brokers or these kind of websites. So I think there are a lot of things that politicians could do to really make their region or their country attractive for Bitcoiners. And of course also a reasonable tax rate is also important, so that you don't feel you just have to give half of what you earn or half of whatever you saved to some government that is just wasting your money.
Yeah, it's so important. And what is also interesting for me is you had a political career before Bitcoin, right?
I was active in politics since 2003, so more than half of my life. And I got elected into the parliament in 2017. At that point, I just bought my first Bitcoin for like $800, and I sold it 1 month later for $1,400. So I had very, very little understanding of Bitcoin at that time, but I was sort of just doing my first baby steps. But I was aware of Bitcoin
And
when I was elected.
how did then adopting Bitcoin while you have an ongoing political career, did this influence your career in the political sphere? Did this uh, was this beneficial to you? Was this a disadvantage to you? How did everybody in your political scene react to that?
I think many people around me, they consider me to be a bit of a weirdo maybe, but many still have some respect. So I even got invited by someone from another political party to talk at his bank's board meeting about Bitcoin, and they invited me like as the unconventional guy. But they were very interested and willing to listen to me. I don't know if they reacted upon everything I said, or maybe they will do 2 years later now. So I think a lot of people sort of still think it's a bit weird what I'm doing with Bitcoin. But many also accept that I am quite knowledgeable about it. They see it. I'm about to publish my first book. It will be an introductory book to Bitcoin based on webinars I've been doing once a month for the past 2.5 years, just free webinars for anyone who was willing to listen to explain Bitcoin to them for people who had little knowledge beforehand. Yeah, but I mean, the Bitcoin community has been very supportive. It's of course not huge yet, so I don't think that right now I'm politically gaining a lot from it. But I'm not someone who does things for political gain. I have very strong convictions and I stand for them. And then I say, well, whoever wants to, let them follow me, and whoever does not want to, that's okay. But I believe that in the future it will be very beneficial for me because Bitcoin adoption will grow, and because I've been rather early, or one of the first politicians almost in Europe to publicly be like really pro Bitcoin. I think it will benefit me in the long term, but at the beginning it's perhaps more people that don't understand me, but that's okay. I just came at the point in 2021. I was at the point where my conviction was so high when I had done a lot of research that I said, well, I don't just want to stack sats and be secretive about it. I mean, many Bitcoiners do it. I understand why, because of privacy and so on. But I said, I also want that my friends know about it, my family knows about it, my voters know about it. So not that one day I'm just successful because of Bitcoin and people say, oh, why didn't you tell us about it? So I wanted to, I mean, as a convinced Christian, I'm also, it's on my heart to share the good news about Jesus Christ. So when I discover something that I'm really convinced of, that I totally believe in, I want others to be able to know what I believe, and also to discover it. And so that's what I also do with Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's an amazing, and I think long term it will be so beneficial to everybody that is standing up for Bitcoin. in whatever shape and form that is. Like if you're just creating content online, if you're a politician, if you're a publicly traded CEO and just adopting Bitcoin and talking about it, like Michael Saylor, like there are so many avenues you can go through, and you don't have to change your life. You don't have to work in Bitcoin to be a Bitcoiner. You can just do whatever you want and love, and you are already doing, and just see how you can drive Bitcoin adoption or just orange pill people around you. And I think this just from a egotistical standpoint of view, I think this will benefit you greatly. But the amazing thing is that Bitcoiners don't do it for that reason. But I still think it's really beneficial for you long term. So I'm always interested, especially if someone is doing something and then in their career they adopted Bitcoin, how this changes something. And for people that also it's changed sometimes even their the view of the world. And for my next question, actually, you teased it. You are a Christian, and I had, I think, 2 podcast episodes before I talked with Pastor Coin, like with the the author of the Bible and Bitcoin, I think is the book called. And I'm fascinated how often this topic comes up on my podcast. I did not realize it before I was starting the podcast, but religion and Bitcoin comes up a lot. And of course, then there are like the haters that don't understand Bitcoin. They say Bitcoin is a religion, but we can even make an argument that it is, but it's not a bad thing. How do you see the connection between Bitcoin, the Bible, Jesus Christ, religion in general, and having faith in something bigger than yourself?
I also love to talk about this because there are a lot of parallels. For me, Bitcoin is clearly not a religion, but I mean, for some people, let's say, if there are people that don't believe in God, I understand when with Bitcoin they find something that they feel is like a higher purpose, or they find almost like a purpose in their life. I understand it. For me, Bitcoin is not the purpose for my life. It's a great tool. I believe that it's divinely inspired, and I'm thankful for it. There's another book called Thank God for Bitcoin. It's also a quote by U.S. Senator Cynthia Lummis that said that. But so for me, Bitcoin is not the end goal. It's a tool to bring more freedom to people, and I really appreciate that tool. I'm thankful for it. I want to educate people about it. But I believe as a Christian that there's eternity, there's heaven, and also that there's hell, and people need to make a decision, and they to be like actually, and that there's actually a truth that matters. So, and that I find that in the Bitcoin community, it's like. I mean, we know all the toxic maximalists. I wouldn't say I'm toxic. I would just say I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. So we as maximalists, we say there's like one single coin, right? There's the one truth coin, and which leads to those goals like economic freedom and separation of money and state and this decentralized system. And we know that all the others are shitcoins because of the way they came into existence and pre-mine, and because they're not secure, because they're not decentralized, because they're just scam coins. So what I find with the Bitcoin community is like this conviction that there's something like absolute truth, which is worth fighting for and standing for. And I also believe that as a Christian, in the end, there's one absolute reality. And I've been sort of annoyed by this post materialism thinking. Well, just believe whatever you want, just as long as you're happy with it, that's okay. I mean, I respect, of course, every opinion, but in the end, I believe there's a reality. There are certain laws in physics and mathematics which Bitcoin is based upon, and I believe there are also certain spiritual laws that, whether you believe them or not, they actually have an influence on your life. And so I believe it's important to really debate these things and to find out what is the truth, what is really reality. And I just love being amongst the Bitcoin community because they're intelligent, they're going against mainstream, they are thinking for themselves, they they are hopeful. And I think that's really something that's really important, to have a community that is hopeful amongst all the bad things that are happening in the world. Yeah, and I love to also just talk about these parallels. And of course, because Bitcoin is such a meaningful innovation, I mean, you see like people referring to Satoshi Nakamoto. It's like almost like for some like a messiah figure that brought that sort of I mean, what Bitcoin achieved is to remove the sinful nature of mankind from the financial system. Of course, you can still do bad things with Bitcoin, but the system itself, because it's based on rules and not rulers, actually what Satoshi Nakamoto achieved was to remove that sinful aspect of humans, that the corruption that comes with humans making decisions within the financial system or the fiat financial system. Satoshi was able to remove that. And so it's like, in part, it's a reverse, or it's just making the financial system less prone to the sinful nature of mankind, which of course then is, in a way, it's a parallel to Jesus Christ, who came to this world to die for the sins of man and to restore the relationship to God by paying with his death for the sin of mankind.
And this leads me also to my next question, because Bitcoin, as you said, is just a tool. And I'm also one of the believers that Bitcoin, in the end of the day, it's just money. But it's such a revolutionizing way of thinking of money that when people, because of number go up technology, discover this topic, all of a sudden they discover a new way of thinking. It's not that Bitcoin directly changes minds, but it leads you down a path, leads you down a research path that actually changes Bitcoin's life. And I think my third guest it was on, who said Bitcoin is a system based on love, because it's a system that is true. Like, as you said, it's total truth, because you cannot manipulate it. Like, there's the 21 million Bitcoin. Once you made a transaction, you made it. You cannot reverse it. You cannot call someone, oh, I made the wrong thing, can you reverse it? Like, it's just truth. And with truth, there comes consequences and self-responsibilities. And that's an amazing thing to have. So now my next question would be, if it's just money, but it also has these implications on people, how do you see or do you see Bitcoin changing society long term, when we think out like 50, 100 years, where we live on a sound money standard again with Bitcoin? Do you see changes happening on a society broad level?
I think the changes will be very big and affecting a lot of aspects of society. What we can really observe when you go to the Bitcoin conferences, to the meetups, talking to people who really have a deeper understanding of Bitcoin, you find the whole time preference thing, which is a very, very important concept. There are people who have been just feeling no sense in life and partying one weekend to the other, spending insane amount of fiat money on alcohol, for example, and then they discover Bitcoin, and they suddenly start thinking in generations. I mean, not suddenly, but with time, and they think about building a family, having children, like that their children will one day inherit part of their Bitcoin stack, and suddenly they think in decades, while before they were only thinking from one weekend to the next. I think it's something beautiful to see. It's also something that, as a committed Christian, you also think of the afterlife, of eternity, and you try to live a life with values that is aligned with this long-term thinking. And so this aspect of thinking long term is also one of these parallels I see between faith and Bitcoin, and which both very much promote. And so thinking long term, I think, will have tremendous positive impacts on most areas of society, and also just by the incentives that a Bitcoin standard would set, to really think well about before spending, not going too much into debt, and having a sound monetary base that is not robbing people of their savings. It's just something beautiful.
Yeah, and I just saw now that you also have the T-shirt on "Freedom Go Up," like the horse. I guess it's a play on the Trojan horse of the number go up technology,
It
and
is.
inside there's a freedom go up technology. I think that's wonderful. I just discovered it now that I looked at your T-shirt. I love it, and we have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who is the next guest actually. And your question, and it's an interesting one. Imagine like when Bitcoin fails, what would you do then, or what would that mean for you personally?
It's a question I had to ask myself in 2021 when I decided to really go publicly as a politician on Bitcoin. Knowing if it fails, then I keep most of my life savings in Bitcoin. I've orange pilled several hundred people, mostly friends, family, colleagues, people who are willing to listen to me. So people who are maybe politically closer to me because were more willing to listen to me, while people who don't like me because of my political viewpoints, most of them also don't listen to me when I talk about Bitcoin. They cannot accept what I say. And so by now, I think not only my personal finances, but also my political career sort of hangs on me not being wrong about Bitcoin and it not failing, which of course there's no 100% security. So, but at some point I just said, well, not doing it is also a risk. So there's no risk-free life. So you just have to decide which risk you want to take. And so if Bitcoin would fail, that might mean the end of my political career, maybe, because it could hurt me so much that people would not re-elect me during the next elections. I would personally be quite broke. And perhaps some friends and family would be a bit angry. They would understand perhaps that I couldn't have seen it coming, maybe because I tried to really look at all the risks that there are. But of course, it would be a very, in a way, challenging situation. But at the end, Bitcoin is not the meaning of my life. That's Jesus Christ, and that's my faith, which is for me much more important, and so will always be like the foundation of my life. So even if Bitcoin fails, I still would have hope in my life, and because my hope ultimately is in God and not in Bitcoin, although I really appreciate all the good things Bitcoin can bring about. And so, I would continue my life with, and I would try to work for justice and love people and, do good. So I would continue to do that. But of course, it would be a severe setback.
And there are two really interesting things in there. Like, first of all, like put your money where your mouth is. Yeah, like you talking about Bitcoin, but you also have a lot in Bitcoin. Like if Bitcoin fails, you fail with it. So people can still trust you because you got hurt the most. Like maybe someone listened to you and they have like 20% of their net worth in Bitcoin. They lost a little bit, like they lost 20%, but you lost almost everything. So you got hurt more. And
Yes.
this is where I'm a true believer. Whatever you're talking, put your money towards it. Like if you are nonstop, like Peter Schiff talking about against Bitcoin, please short it. Otherwise, don't talk negative about it. You're not in a position where you can talk so negative about it, and don't short it. Like whatever you are believing in, you should put your money towards it. And this is something truly beautiful. If you're like, I'm a Bitcoiner, I have 100% in Bitcoin. That's why I also went all in Bitcoin. I was also really big in Tesla, but at some point I was like, I don't want to talk too much about Tesla. I actually like to talk about full time in Bitcoin. But then I also have to put my money where my mouth is. I cannot have 50-50 between Tesla and Bitcoin. If I only talk about Bitcoin, then I have to have everything in Bitcoin. This is my bet. This is what I do. I mean, I'm also quite young, 25. Like if I lose everything next year, I'm where every 26 years old is with nothing, basically. And the second part is, and this is an amazing part, because so many people now are totally in Bitcoin and they are willing to defend it to an extreme extent. So like you, me, and there are hundreds and thousands and millions of other people that are in Bitcoin, like bigger people like Michael Saylor. Even like if Bitcoin fails, it would be tremendous for him. Like if Bitcoin goes to zero tomorrow, that would be like bankrupting a MicroStrategy, basically, I think. And so I think this is the god of Bitcoin a little bit. Like all the humans that are believing in it and getting stronger and bigger. It's like I think Michael actually talks a lot about this, the cyber hornet that is willing to defend the network at all cost. And this is also something that when people say like, but nobody is guarding Bitcoin. Yes, there are people that are guarding Bitcoin. And I think 2017 with the block size wars, this is something where we truly have seen the power of the Bitcoin community and the strengths and the actual decentralization of it. So they are like really cool stuff you just said, yeah.
Let me maybe add a quick parallel to that just came to my mind. Also back to the question of faith. When we look at the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ, the early church, I mean, they said they saw Jesus rise from the dead. They say they encountered him after he was crucified, and then they spread the message about Jesus Christ in all of the world. So, and they were willing to die for these claims. And 11 of the 12 apostles actually suffered a very, very cruel death. They were tortured to death, like 11 of 12 of them. But that shows to me that they were convinced that what they were talking about is the truth. Otherwise, I don't think they would have been willing to die for that. And I believe that's one of the reasons why Christianity is the largest faith in the world right now, because there have been so many people who, I mean, of course, there have been bad examples throughout history with the Crusades, but hundreds of millions of Christians have decided that they're willing to die for their convictions. Because they have such a strong faith and belief that what they believe in is the truth. And this is what made Christianity actually very, very influential in the world, that you had these people, the martyrs, who said, I'm not going to kill anyone because of my faith, but if I'm being put, like the question is being put to me, do you want to deny Christ or live, then I'm willing to die for my faith. And the price that people pay will show what their conviction is. And perhaps with Bitcoin, maybe there are not too many who'd say, I'm willing to lay down my life. I mean, Jack Mallers says he said, I will die on this hill. So there are some. But even putting your life savings in Bitcoin is a very, very strong statement to say, I'm really backing this up with my actions, and if this fails, then yeah, I'm really taking a hit, and it is this kind of behavior that really also strengthens the Bitcoin network.
Totally. And I think this is a great way to end the podcast, a great way to conclude the podcast. Thank you, Samuel, for talking with me, for being on the show, being here as a Bitcoin educator, and bringing the political side also a little bit in, the faith side also a little bit in. It was a pleasure for me to talk with you. For people that have more questions about you, that want to be involved in Bitcoin, that maybe also like in Swiss, and they want to be involved in your Swiss political things, where can people reach out to you? Where can people ask you questions the best way?
Find me on X, Samuel.Kullmann, or I'm not sure whether there's a dot in between or not, or Facebook. Facebook and X are my most used social media. Yeah, and thank you for these fascinating questions. I really loved our interview.
Perfect. Thank you.